Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours. Stack Overflow is down. It's really interesting to see when StackOverflow.com goes down. So I don't work with Stack Overflow as like a consultant anymore. I did years ago. But when I did, it was always really interesting to see. You could kind of tell where things were going wrong by how the app reacted. If it couldn't reach the primary SQL server, it put a banner across the top. The developers were genius in how they did this. They put a banner across the top saying that the site was currently in read-only mode. They would switch over the app servers to point to the readable secondaries, and they could still render the site using the readable secondaries. You just couldn't upvote or downvote or ask questions or post answers. That's the kind of thing that people assume that applications will automatically do, that when you have an availability group and the primary goes down, people think that automatically somehow applications are going to figure out, oh, I should connect to the secondary and read there, and it is nowhere near that simple. Furthermore, it's not easy for applications to even understand, oh, I'm on a read-only SQL server, I should show something at the top of the page. So it's really neat how they did it. They put a lot of work in order to make it make sense. Yeah, Frag King says the status site, the status site isn't working well either. My guess is that it also relies on a database connection. Check out their Twitter account. If you search for Stack Overflow status Twitter, they have a Twitter account. I don't know that that's been updated or not either. I just know that's where I would usually go and check. Oatmeal and Chill says, where do Stack Overflow engineers go to search for solutions? Well, these days, like Surly Dev mentioned, ChatGPT, at least you can fire open ChatGPT and that still works. I have not had great luck on using Stack or using ChatGPT to get technical enough answers for me. Just because for me, it's usually faster to go over to the web and get the answers that I want. But I keep meaning to. I've got a pro ChatGPT account, whatever they call it, the $20 a month tier, and I keep meaning to use it more and try and see how it goes. But I understand that most people are doing that. I should actually put a poll up in Twitch. Let's see here. So the other day I tried a prediction. I should do a poll instead here. Have you used ChatGPT in this week to solve a tech problem? Yes, no, and we'll say, oh, I can add query bucks per vote. Oh, that's kind of cool. So we'll start a poll there that you can answer over in the Twitch chat. Oh, Shaw, for questions, check out the URL on the screen right below me. That's where you post questions, and then people can upvote the questions that they want to see me answered. And if enough people upvote that, I'd be glad to discuss that on the screen. Let's go take a look at what the poll results look like. It's neck and neck at the moment. Like 43% of people say yes, they've used ChatGPT this week to solve a tech problem. It's going back and forth as people vote, and more folks are saying no now. I've used ChatGPT in the last week. I just haven't used it to solve a tech problem. I recently did a stream about how I've been using ChatGPT to help me brainstorm ideas for blog posts and training classes. Yeah, right now as more people vote in, we're at about 75% say no. So that's an interesting. I'm watching to kind of see how that changed too as well. Frag King says, does Copilot count as ChatGPT? Yeah, absolutely. Copilot relies on ChatGPT under the hood too. So there we go. The final answer was no. At 67% of the audience says no, they have not used it to solve a problem. Well, that's kind of interesting to see. All right, let's go see what your top voted question is. The top voted question is from Amir. Oh, let me refresh my poll gap page because I don't think it's actually recording the questions that I show. There it goes. Amir says, does AZ900 worth the effort and money? I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't remember Microsoft's exam numbers. It's been a really long time since I have. And the big reason why is the first two letters of that, AZ. I don't do a lot of work in Azure. The vast majority of my clients are on Amazon Web Services. I know Microsoft doesn't want me to say that, but the reality is that they're trying to push Azure really hard. So in order to get data certifications these days, you have to use Azure on the certifications. I don't. And so there isn't really a certification right now for people who do on-premises SQL Server or for people who use SQL Server in Amazon. And that's the majority of business that I see. I get them that Microsoft's trying to push Azure. Everybody's doing it. It's the coolest thing. But what we see over and over again, whether it's SQL ConstantCare users, whether it's polls that we do out in the audience, whether it's the annual salary survey, Azure is, specifically Azure SQL DB, is an extremely small portion of the audience. So do I think it's worth the effort and money? I don't. If I'm going to try to get a job, I want a certification that covers what most employers are doing. And just right now, there isn't one for SQL Server or for SQL Server in its wider scope, like Amazon and Google as well. So, sadly. Mr. M, next question, Mr. M asks, hi Brent, which feature in SQL Server do you like the most? So I saw this question when it came in. I happened to be looking and like going through questions. I happened to see this and I put a lot of thought into this. And the answer that I'm going to give is going to sound kind of weird. I like that the core part of T-SQL hasn't changed in like 25 years. If you wrote an app 25 years ago and you only used the core portions of T-SQL, insert, update, delete, select, you didn't create table, drop table, create view, drop view, create stored procedures, functions, etc. Your query didn't have to change at all for 25 years. That's amazing. There aren't a lot of development languages that have worked for 25 years, and today's current deployment methods aren't any better. It's not like they go, well, the T-SQL you wrote 25 years ago, it still works, but you should be using T-SQL version 3000. No, it's still T-SQL. That's phenomenal. Richie in the chat, Joris, Richie is on our team, does development for all our apps, like everything that we build. And every time that we use a or go to open a product that we haven't worked on in a while, like paste the plan or whatever, so many packages have changed, language stuff needs to change, unit tests need to change, all those kinds of things. It's crazy how much development is just this continuous hamster wheel of keeping up with stuff, and T-SQL's been gloriously the same. Michael J. Swartz says, my favorite feature is maybe the select statement, and that's kind of what I'm getting at too. I feel exactly the same way. Alpha Corona says he's crying in QBasic. I know, like 25 years ago, 23 years ago, I was learning C# and VB.NET and Java, trying to decide between the two of them which one I was going to bet my career on, and I ended up choosing SQL because I thought that language would be the most likely to be static, because I suck really bad at learning languages. I'm not very good at learning languages at all. I can't stand it. Next up, Q-Ent asks, hi Brent, I took the mastering classes bundle and I'm now on the mastering index part. That's the first part, okay. He says, while you do your magic on the queries, you never consider statistics. Oh, that's because the statistics class is totally free. That's out on YouTube. If you want to learn about SQL Server statistics, search for Brent Ozar SQL Statistics on YouTube, and there's a totally free class. It's a whole bunch of videos. A couple of the videos are me, and then a bunch of the videos are Doug Lane, who did a really beautiful job explaining how statistics work and how you can go about when you should update them, what kind of difference they make in the queries, and so forth. And that's totally free, so you can totally check that out. Yvette asks a question that's going to get me in trouble. What's the max recommended ceiling for a single availability group in terms of number of databases? Microsoft doesn't publish one. For me, the number I'm going to give you is 100. Can you go higher? Yes. Can you go higher in newer versions of SQL Server? Yes. but you start to run into problems with worker thread starvation, where SQL Server doesn't have enough worker threads to get its job done. And the reason that I give 100 as a starting point number is you can do 150 or 200 in some circumstances. But by the time that you've hit 100, I want you to start thinking about another plan. I want you to start thinking about a different architecture that you're going to use in order to accomplish your goals, whether it's spreading the databases out across more SQL servers, switching to failover clustered instances, or even switching over to something like Azure SQL DB with elastic pools. It's not that you can't do it, it's just that when it breaks, it's catastrophically bad. The more databases that you have with worker thread starvation. If you want to learn more about that, Google for what not to do availability groups. What not to do availability groups. And there's a brilliant Microsoft certified master, I want to say from Australia. This is going to drive me crazy that I can't remember his name. But he's a great post over on Simple Talk explaining the problems. Warwick Rudd, explaining the problems that happen when you run out of worker threads due to availability group issues. GuoroNet, thanks for the 2-month subscription there with Prime. I appreciate it. For those of you who have Amazon Prime, you get 1 free subscription to a Twitch channel every month. And when you subscribe, you don't have to see the ads. Whenever Twitch runs its automatic ad breaks, you just won't see them. Unlike the pores. Next up, Ricardo asks, what should I do when I say to a new customer, no, you should not be partitioning that fact table, and they ignore me and they continue to have problems? Oh, I love the book Secrets of Consulting by Gerald Weinberg, and it's Weinberg, Secrets of Consulting. There's several editions. There's like more Secrets of Consulting and so forth. And it's really about how the business of consulting is how to give advice in a way that people are likely to take it, and how to understand when, if they don't take it, if it's your problem with the way that you gave the advice, or if it's the client's problem in the way they decided to ignore it. One of the early experiences that I had with consulting, not as a consultant, but as being a full-time administrator, was I kept telling my boss back when I was a full-time database administrator, hey, yo, we can't run a data warehouse on 16 gigs of RAM. It's not going to work. We need more RAM in the server. And I kept saying it over and over again. The users were very upset. We did a big, huge consulting engagement with Microsoft, cost the company tens of thousands of dollars. And at the end of it, Microsoft said, you should add RAM. And my boss went, okay. I figured out over time that it was in the way that I communicated that. I didn't give evidence. I didn't give like a summary. I didn't give clear graphs showing what the problem was. I didn't compare costs back and forth. I learned a lot of tricks over the years about how I can give advice better, and then that makes it more likely that my clients take the advice. And not all clients need the same approach. Some clients need different approaches in the way that you dispense that advice, and Gerald's book makes it very easy to learn that. Nathaniel asks, what is your official jingle or song? I don't have one, but I can tell you the 2 songs that come into my head all the time when they don't mean to. One is It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas. 2 is Back Home Again in Indiana, sung by Jim Nabors before the Indy 500 started. For decades, he would sing it, Back Home Again in Indiana. I have no idea why those 2 songs always pop into my head, but there you go. Happens just like when I'm walking the dog or whatever. Jorah says for me it's Shaka Khan. That's not bad either. Shaka Khan, Shaka Khan. Benji asks, does table or row compression affect SQL backup performance? Okay, so if you compress the pages, that means that there's less pages with data in the database, and the backup will go faster in the sense that there are less pages to read. The backup probably will not go faster in the sense that there's less pages to write because backup compression is a totally separate process. Backup compression can compress more things than table, row, or page compression. For example, table, row, and page compression don't affect off-row data like XML or JSON or nvarchar max that gets stored off the page, whereas backup compression does. If you're worried about making backup compression go, or backup SQL performance backup go faster, search for Brent I faster backups, and I have a blog post that details all the ways you can get your backups to go faster. Striping to multiple backup files, turning on backup compression, testing backup to null to understand your storage reads performance, and so forth. Shaka Khan, Shaka Khan. Ralph asks, do you know of any slick GPT fact-checking tools? Yes, actually, there's a really good one. It's called Google. So this is really cool, Ralph. You can do something called your own research. I know you ignored that when your teachers kept telling you to do it in school. Your teachers kept telling you to go do your own research. Don't believe everything you read. Just because your mom told you on Facebook that Bill Gates was going to give you $1 for every time you forwarded that message doesn't mean it's true. But Google's this company, it's fairly large even. You might have heard of it through your travels. They make quite a bit of money off of people who need to check facts. That is the place where I might suggest that you start. Next up, Freyja, which is so cool because it's the name of one of Jeremiah and Kendra's dogs. Freyja asks, what is your opinion of using Columnstore indexes on temp tables in a stored procedure? It's so rare that people can successfully diagnose that they need even indexes on temp tables, period, let alone column store indexes. So I get really suspicious of people doing column store and temp tables. What I would say is, if you're repeatedly hitting that temp object over and over again, let's talk about the process that's doing that rather than, perfectly constructing a temporary object. What are we doing with the data that we need to read it that much? Column store makes the most sense when you're talking about wide tables or tables with a lot of rows. And if you're putting that much stuff into TempDB, I have questions. Yitzhar asks a good question. What is the best way to capture locks for a problematic stored procedure while you're asleep? So if you're trying to figure out which locks it needs to take out, run it while you're awake. Do a begin tran and execute that stored procedure. Don't commit it. Just begin tran, run the stored procedure. Obviously, you would want to do this in development, not in production. And then when that stored procedure finishes, go run sp who is active and with get locks underscore 1. I'm sorry, get underscore locks equals 1. Get underscore locks is a parameter for sp who is active. And when you set get locks equals 1, it returns an XML column with a list of all the locks that are owned by each of the processes that are running. So then you can see exactly what locks that stored procedure needed. And you can be awake while all of this happens. The locks that it needs should be exactly the same as the locks that it needs when you're asleep, as long as the source data is the same. The times when this could vary is when if the stored procedure processes a whole bunch of data overnight, and that like it has a Q table that's chock full of nuts whenever it goes to run, simulate that same process while you're awake. Start there. Then, if you want to tune it, work on reducing the number of locks that it needs, because there's probably another process that's running overnight at the same time that also needs locks. But this is the easiest way to just go get started. Rufus asks, does a data warehouse vendor typically drive reporting software choice or vice versa? I don't know because I'm not really involved in the data warehouse market or the reporting software market or selling them. But I'll tell you in my experience, what usually drives purchasing processes is a bunch of executives who go out to a golf course or a steak restaurant or a strip club somewhere and they get together and they rub elbows and they make bad decisions together, and then the executives come back in and they say, we're going to use Power BI. And I actually like Power BI, but I'm just giving you that as an example. The way that those kinds of big enterprise decisions are usually made is by a bunch of executives who are drunk and building business connections. Same thing that drives a lot of architecture decisions, like anything enterprisey, it's all based on relationships, and the vendors will say, well, come on over and go to this sports ball game with me, Bob. And then Bob goes over there and he says, well, I really trust vendor X because they take me to sports games. They never say that out loud, but that's reality what it is. Next up, we have Karthik, who says, hello, Brent. My friend's trying to create a new Columnstore index on a clustered Columnstore index. Sometimes it's got a suboptimal plan for the index creation taking too much time. Is there a way to influence the optimizer? The thing that I would really say is when you say you're trying to do this too often, it's taking too much time, you shouldn't need to create non-clustered indexes that often. Columnstore tables tend to be fairly large, hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes in size. So if you're trying to tune them, consider instead doing it with online equals on. You can even do it with resumable too these days. You can resume an index creation, like pause it under heavy load and then reestablish it again. But if you're just talking about how do you improve execution plans, go to any of our execution plan training classes, go to Mastering Index Tuning, go to Mastering Query Tuning. I teach you how to read execution plans. And really, at the end of the day, it's no different than selecting everything from the table. You don't have a where clause on there, so you don't have a whole lot of insight or input into changing that. But at least you'll be able to understand better what SQL Server's doing. Frag King says Stack Overflow is back. I'll be curious to see what their outage plan or what their outage recap was. It's always fun reading those kinds of postmortems. Tonio asks, hi Brent, is there a good way to estimate how much memory a SQL Server needs? Wouldn't it be cool if there was? Wouldn't it be cool if there was? Unfortunately, there is not. And I'll give you the advice that I give my .com clients, the ones who have all kinds of VC funding. They like to say things like performance is a feature. We can't afford to hire enough developers quickly. We just need to ship code quickly and get it to market and have happy customers. Take whatever your database size is and double it. If you have a 100 gigabyte database, you probably want 200 gigabytes of RAM. Right about now, you're like, oh my God, my heart, I can hardly stand it. No, but think about this for a second here, because if you're a rapidly growing company, you want to stuff enough memory in there that it's going to last you for a year or two. You don't want to have this memory discussion again in 2 or 3 months. And in addition, you're probably having bad queries in the beginning. When you're just slinging code out quickly, you don't have enough time to do index tuning. So people are doing order by on sorting large tables. Any one query can get granted up to 25% of your RAM. So I want a lot of wiggle room in the beginning. Then the more stable that your application becomes over time, the easier it is to cut back that memory and figure out as your database size grows, cut that back and do your performance tuning to figure out a good point. So he says, Tonio continues, he says, I have customers who insist that 16 gigs of memory is good enough for their 500 gigabyte DB and have performance issues. Okay, so what's causing the performance issues? Spoiler alert, I talk about that in the Mastering Server Tuning class. People who go to the Mastering Server Tuning class are able to instrument which things are causing the problem. They're able to specify if it's memory or CPU or blocking or storage, and then they can recommend which fixes make the most sense. You haven't been to that class yet. Go. Next up, let's see here. Replicant asks, it's been years since I've used replication and I avoided it as much as possible. How is it in newer versions of SQL Server and would you use it? No, not at all. I don't go near it with a 10-foot pole. The replication's really cool when the database doesn't change. If the database is really static, when the tables don't change, the indexes don't change, when the data in them doesn't change dramatically, replication is fine. But in situations where you're constantly adding columns, you're changing indexes, or you wipe and reload large amounts of data, that's where your heartache begins. So I don't like it for those kinds of purposes. But as long as the data is stable and the tables are stable, replication's fine. For sure says I'd watch Tech ASMR just to read tech specs to me for an hour. I should probably do that at some point, reading books online for an hour and see what they say. Next up, let's see here. Denish asks, Power BI freezes the SQL Server whenever it fetches the full data. Is there any effective way to solve such large grabbing operations? Yes, Power BI can do incremental loads. Check out the concept of incremental loading with Power BI, and you can only load the data that's changed, which is what you really want to do as the data starts to grow. Otherwise, if you reload the whole data every time it runs, that's called a Groundhog Day load, where you force SQL Server to live the same nightmare over and over and over again, like the movie Groundhog Day. Next up, Don't Bother Asking says, have Brent clients approached you regarding the implementation of CI/CD with a database in the pipeline? Yes. I don't do that work. Instead, I refer them to Alex Yates. Alex Yates has a consultancy based out of the UK, and several of my clients have used his help to evaluate whether or not CI/CD made sense for their particular workloads. So if you search for Alex Yates CI/CD, he'll have his website on there. I can't quite remember what it was. The original alters are says, the ad interrupted. Hey, I got good news. There's a way that you can stop ads on Twitch. Do you know what it is? You can subscribe. There you go. Blomik says incremental loading doesn't load data that's changed, it loads data between two dates. Absolutely, it's up to you to know what date range is passed. For example, if you're continuously loading sales, you would only want to load the sales from the last time that you loaded. Then, if you know that you've reloaded sales in the data warehouse going back to a specific date, then you can pass that over to Power BI and say, give me this date range. In addition, if you want to get fancy with it, you can even use triggers. Andy Leonard is a friend of mine who does this kind of work with SSIS, Azure Data Factory, Power BI. And you can learn more from him at entdna.com. It's like Enterprise DNA, entdna.com. Learn more about that. Next up, Hanny says, hi Brent, I'm trying to look for a lifetime access payment option for your level 2 bundle. I don't have it. The reason why is level 2 bundle includes online applications and software. And since that involves us continuously delivering services to you, we can't give you lifetime accesses to a web service that may or may not be around in, like, say, 20 years. Who knows? As much as I would love to promise that Richie and I will be doing exactly the same thing 30 years from now, I cannot guarantee that to be the case because he and I both like to be lazy. Surly Dev, thanks for the shout outs there to Andy Leonard over there on Twitch. Andy streams on Twitch, and you can ask him questions in there as well, too. Very cool. Next up, Bocephus asks, how can you show us what it's like to use dual monitors with SSMS? I don't stretch SSMS across 2 monitors. It does have docking windows that you can pull out and put elsewhere. I don't usually need that. I have one big monster monitor that I use for whatever I'm primarily focused on, like SSMS, Azure Data Studio, email, whatever it is that I'm doing at the time. And then on my other monitors, I have a 15-inch laptop there and a 14-inch monitor over here. I use for other tasks like Slack so that I can watch what Richie's doing and send memes. But I don't spread SMS across multiple monitors. Tonio says, is there any feature of Oracle database that you wish SQL Server had? I don't know Oracle that well. I know when I would read about its features every now and then, I'd often be like, oh my gosh, that sounds really cool and amazing. But then I would just kind of discard it. Because the thing with a lot of dials in databases is people will go and play around with those dials even when they don't have a good reason to. And what I find is that a lot of dials, even that exist in SQL Server, people go around touching them for no good reason. So I wish that SQL Server didn't have so many dials. I wish more of the things were built in and automatic, like cost threshold for parallelism and max stop. Those are dials that I just don't think most people should be setting in the year 2023. I think they're dials that the database platform should monitor for us and take care of us. It just doesn't work that way yet. And then we'll do one more. Let's see here. One more. We'll say Peter asks, what is your opinion on naming and nesting of CTEs? I love it. It makes it really easy to read and follow along with a query. If you break the logic up into parts, then if it doesn't perform the way you want it to, you can easily tear those parts out and use them as temp tables instead. And I teach you how to do that in Mastering Query Tuning with my X-Acto knife technique. That is the end of our office hours for today. So next week, I'm not going to be streaming. Next week, I am going to Ohio for 3 days, I think, going to teach database administrators, database administration firm over there. I'll be back in 2 weeks, back to our regularly scheduled broadcast back here out of my home studio. I don't travel very often these days for work. I travel a lot for fun, but I don't travel that much often for work these days. I set rates differently. Like my remote rates are really cheap, because I like my bed and my fridge. My remote rates are really cheap and my on-site rates are really expensive, just because I don't want to, get in a plane and deal with business hotels and all those kinds of things. But I do have one next week, so I'll be off there. var SQL, make sure to hit the URL there on the screen. I know I've hidden it very trickily there, right there underneath where I'm talking, but you can put the questions in there and head out. All right, so I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios, y'all.